The Newsagents USA.
Look at what's happening to the towns all over the United States. And a lot of towns don't want to talk. It's not going to be Aurora or Springfield. A lot of towns don't want to talk about it because they're so embarrassed by it. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
You talk about extreme.
Okay, full disclosure. I genuinely didn't have immigrants are eating people's pets in Springfield, Ohio on my bingo card. It's like Homer Simpson is alive and well and in Springfield adjudicating what's going on for us.
I'd like to be able to say that was the most bizarre bit of Donald Trump during the course of that debate with Kamala Harris, but it wasn't. There was a lot more besides. And what Kamala Harris did was lay traps for Donald Trump, which he looked into and jumped, exactly as she had hoped. So, has this done anything to change the race? Welcome to the Newsagents USA.
The Newsagents USA with Emily Maitlis and John Sopel.
It's John.
It's Emily, and it is the middle of the night, and we have been up, and I think it's fair to say that when we came to this debate, we just assumed that it couldn't possibly be as excruciating a watch as the last one, the one that CNN hosted that essentially spelled the end of Biden's presidential nomination. And yet this one, in its own way, was equally excruciating and kind of fabulous.
It was fabulous because actually you could see 100% why Donald Trump wanted to have Joe Biden as his opponent and not Kamala Harris. Because Kamala Harris was articulate, persuasive. She made her point. She might not like the policies that she was advocating, but she was pretty clear on where she stood. And every time that Donald Trump, I don't know whether he had in his head a mental note to himself about what is the strategy of this debate. Yeah. But over the course of 90 minutes, he was led down all sorts of little byways and dead-end roads that led nowhere because that's where Kamala Harris wanted to take him. Now, obviously, the most important subject, we keep hearing it from American voters, is the state of the economy, which is where they started.
Donald Trump has no plan for you. And when you look at his economic plan, it's all about tax breaks for the richest people. I am offering what I describe as an opportunity economy, and the best.
But in the end, you feel that the clips that will go viral on social media had nothing to do with either's economic plans.
Yeah, I mean, I actually thought when she first started, there was a kind of gulp and she sounded nervous and her first word was so, and I thought, oh no, this isn't her medium. She's not going to handle the sort of ad lib, the free thinking, the free flowing sort of debate style very well. And then actually she turned it into a riff on her autobiography, you know, growing up as a middle class girl. She came to this debate prepared. She had set pieces, which I think, to be fair, she had probably memorized. She'd learned off by heart and she injected them in as if she was doing an exam and she had to get certain dates and certain arguments into that paper. He came to it, I think, knowing that he had all the debate preparation behind him. He's done 7. You know, he's now done 7 of these presidential debates. He's quite good at just talking off the bat. And yet he hadn't prepared. And every time she led him down one way or another, as you've said, he kind of jumped into it. And they talked through the economy. And I don't think that really landed any punches. It should have been Trump's. He is stronger in polling on the economy. But it was when they got to the subject of abortion that things took a turn for the macabre worst. Have a listen.
They have abortion in the 9th month. They even have, and you can look at the governor of West Virginia, the previous governor of West Virginia, not the current governor, is doing an excellent job, but the governor before, he said the baby will be born and we will decide what to do with the baby. In other words, we'll execute the baby. And that's why I did that, because that predominates, because they're radical. The Democrats are radical in that. And her vice presidential pick, which
If Donald Trump was going to make this a central part of his attack or defense on abortion policy, that babies are being executed, well, it wasn't West Virginia, it was Virginia, and where it was the previous governor who'd said something infamously phrased, Ralph Northam. It was just ridiculous because you kind of had this hellscape picture in your mind of America where if they're not eating your cats and dogs, they're executing your babies. And that was Donald Trump's defense to the very serious question that women have lost the right to choose as a result of the changes that he made to the Supreme Court. And I kind of thought that Kamala Harris, when she got the chance to respond to it, was pretty forceful in trying to just say, hang on, this is about women's lives and women having the right to choose over their own reproductive rights.
Now, in over 20 states, there are Trump abortion bans, which make it criminal for a doctor or nurse to provide health care. In one state, it provides prison for life. Trump abortion bans that make no exception even for rape and incest, which understand what that means.
Yeah, I mean, let's just cut to the chase here and clean up any discrepancies. To quote the moderators, who I have to say were brilliant tonight.
There's no state in this country where it is legal to kill a baby after it's born.
It is called murder. And the weird thing is, we have had that line spouted to us by Republican lawmakers, actually, in the southern states, in Georgia, in South Carolina. We have heard that firsthand because it is a talking point that Trump has tried to push to get people to repeat. And even after he was corrected, he carried on repeating it. There must be a desperation. If your only answer to will there be a federal ban on abortion is we've got to stop people killing babies after they're born, it doesn't happen in the US. And where Trump could have been really clever, where he should have gone for the jugular on Kamala Harris more, is to say, come on, where are your term limits? Where are your abortion term limits? What do you actually want to sign off on people being allowed to do late in the day in their pregnancies? He didn't really push her on that. And as a result, she totally won that hands down because it was a ludicrous thing to say. And he did say that this now goes back to the people. It goes back to the votes in Ohio, the votes in Kansas, as he discussed. But I think that he has, as you say, he's sort of pushed us into this hellscape. It sort of felt like the oral equivalent of a painting by Hieronymo Bosch, where you just see sort of, blood and guts and gore and heads kind of falling off. And it is the picture of hell.
As I was listening to it, I was thinking, okay, that I'm sure is being cheered in super MAGA houses up and down America, that Donald Trump is invoking these images of the dystopian vision of America, because that's what they all believe. But does it reach out to anyone apart from Trump's base? And Trump's always had the same problem, that he can get to 45% of the vote, but that doesn't win you a presidential election. You've got to push on higher, and you've got to reach out to moderate Republicans. You've got to reach out to independents. You've got to reach out to college-educated women, reach out to people in the suburbs. What was the strategy in that? Because it seemed to me that it was just sort of faintly absurd what he was saying.
Very interesting that he repeated that he has been a leader on IVF. He now wants to turn the narrative on this. He suddenly realized that actually, even though a lot of the senators, the Republican senators, did not vote to increase funding towards IVF, he now wants to be the champion of IVF to encourage, people to think that he is the sort of the pro-family guy. And he's having a hard time getting this through because of all the flip-flops. He's flip-flopped about the Florida abortion ban and whether 6 weeks is too short. He's flip-flopped about whether he supports IVF or whether, like J.D. Vance, he senator, he couldn't vote to actually increase funding on that. And I think this is where it gets really complicated for him. He hasn't given the American people a clear narrative on abortion at all. He praised the Supreme Court. He praised the judges. There is nothing that people would look at Donald Trump and say, I understand where you sit on this issue.
Something else about the tactic and the playbook of Kamala Harris, which I thought was really clever, which was go for Trump's insecurities, make a joke about them, ridicule him on it, and see how he responds, whether he will take the bait And every time he did, and there are lots of examples in the debate, this is just one, where Kamala Harris said, when people turn up at your rallies, they go early. This is how it went.
And I'm going to actually do something really unusual, and I'm going to invite you to attend one of Donald Trump's rallies, because it's a really interesting thing to watch. You will see during the course of his rallies, he talks about fictional characters like Hannibal Lecter. He will talk about windmills cause cancer. And what you will also notice is that people start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom. And I will tell you, the one thing you will not hear him talk about is you. You will not hear him talk about your needs, your dreams, and your desires. And I'll tell you, I believe you deserve a president who actually puts you first, and I pledge to you that I will.
Thank you. President Trump, on that point, I want to get your response.
Well, I would like to respond.
Let me just ask, though, why did you try to kill that bill, and successfully so, that would have put thousands of additional agents and officers on the border?
First, let me respond as to the
Please.
rallies. She said people start leaving. People don't go to her rallies. There's no reason to go. And the people that do go, she's bussing them in and paying them to be there, and then showing them in a different light. So she can't talk about that. People don't leave my rallies. We have the biggest rallies, the most incredible rallies in the history of politics. That's because people want to take their country back.
It's like watching a kitten and a ball of string, isn't it? I mean, immigration is not a safe territory for her. You know, she was never the border czar, but she was put in charge with sorting out the problem. And it is one of the biggest areas of weakness for the Democrats. And she did get on to talking about the fact that they put together a border bill that he tried to stop because he didn't actually want the problem solved from, as it were, opposition. But as soon as she's asked about immigration, all she has to do is dangle this idea that people are bored and exhausted at his rallies, and snatch, that little claw goes up and he grabs the ball of string, and now he's playing with the rallies, and they love my rallies, and they're the biggest political things in history, and I love it. He can't even talk about immigration. He's got to correct the record on how fascinating and how big and how huge his rallies are. He can't leave it alone.
We will be back after the break with some of the other areas where Donald Trump and Kamala Harris clashed royally.
And some breaking news just coming to us live now.
The Newsagents USA with Emily Maitlis and John Sopel. The Newsagents USA with Emily Maitlis and John Sopel.
I am going to go back to my news presenter past with this. We have breaking news, and really it is huge news, because within an hour of the debate ending, Taylor Swift has come out and said she is backing Kamala Harris to be the next president of the United States.
She's posted on Instagram. It's a picture of her with a cat. In fact, she signed off her post, Taylor Swift, childless cat lady, a reference to those J.D. Vance remarks. But what she says is this: like many of you, I watched the debate tonight. If you haven't already, now is a great time to do your research on the issues at hand and the stances these candidates take on the topics that matter to you the most. As a voter, I make sure to watch and read everything I can about their proposed policies and plans for this country. She goes on to say that an AI had falsely endorsed Donald Trump. It was an AI of her, and she wants to correct the record. And she says, I'll be casting my vote for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz in the 2024 presidential election. I'm voting for Kamala Harris because she fights for the rights and causes I believe need a warrior to champion them. I think she's a steady-handed, gifted leader. I believe we can accomplish so much more for this country if we're led by calm and not chaos. I think it's really interesting how sort of unemotional in a way that post is. She doesn't sort of rant and rave and call him names. She just says, do your research, go away, check your facts, work out what matters to you. And I have come to this conclusion because she seems like a good pair of hands. It's quite a sort of grown-up endorsement, really. But I mean, be in no doubt, this will rock the entire electoral axis in the States. This has just fundamentally changed the race by, I mean, I'm going to say pretty much anyone under 40, but maybe it's anyone under 70. I don't know, but I think it will.
Look, this is undoubtedly huge news because Taylor Swift obviously doesn't need underlining. is pretty popular, to put it mildly, and she carries a lot of influence. And there were an awful lot of people who thought that following the death threats, literal death threats that had been made to her before when she'd said sort of things that were supportive of Democrats, that she might choose, just for the sake of peace and quiet, and the rest of her family, her extended family, would just not offer an opinion this time round. She has. I think the other thing I would observe, Emily, is that I wonder about the timing of it, because actually, in a way, if you're Kamala Harris, you want the headlines that Americans are going to wake up to today to be about the debate and whether or not she did well. And Kamala Harris did do well. Instead of which, this is going to blow the debate out of the water.
I don't think she cares. I would
Don't
not
you?
think she... No, I'm almost certain. I mean, who knows? But I would be very,
coordinated?
yeah, I would be very surprised if somebody on her team didn't have a heads up that this would come if she felt that it was possible. I mean, who knows? But I think if you're Kamala Harris, kind of tomorrow morning's headlines say that you've been endorsed by the most famous woman in the world, pretty much, you'd take that.
Well, I mean, you talked on the podcast the other day, Emily, about the fact that Kamala Harris is enjoying this huge lead among women over Donald Trump. And as we know, women vote in greater numbers than men. This endorsement from Taylor Swift is going to exaggerate that gap, I suspect. I would also think that at Trump HQ, where they were probably feeling pretty down about the debate anyway, and the force of a Taylor Swift endorsement will carry many, many news cycles going forward. And you just think that the Trump campaign must be thinking, God, we have really got unlucky. Joe Biden out of the race, Kamala Harris doing well, and now bloody Taylor Swift's got involved.
Yeah, and the only thing I'd say is that sometimes we will, of course, get this wrong. We will hear a certain way that the debate played out that millions in America won't. They will have warmed to Donald Trump on immigration. They will have warmed to his repeated references to fracking in Pennsylvania. They will have seen in him the guy who was going to end the Ukraine-Russia war. This was something that he sort of has repeated and said again tonight, that he could end it on day one. And there is always this mismatch, isn't there, between what we think people have taken away from this and actually still what millions of MAGA supporting Americans will have heard. And I mean, there was a really interesting bit, which maybe we should come on to, which was about race. And I was quite surprised that they brought in this subject as its own topic, because the moderators referred to Donald Trump having kind of questioned Harris's identity, whether she was actually black or whether she'd sort of changed her mind on being black. And they ask her what she thinks about it. And Trump first, we can play you his response, which is kind of like, I love everyone. I love black people. I have lots of friends who are black. I mean, it's one of those answers. And then it goes to her. Let's play you that in full.
Why do you believe it's appropriate to weigh in on the racial identity of your opponent?
I don't, and I don't care. I don't care what she is. I don't care. You make a big deal out of something. I couldn't care less. Whatever she wants to be is okay with me.
But those were your words, so I'm
asking.
I
don't know. I mean, all I can say is I read where she was not black, that she put out, and I'll say that. And then I read that she was black, and that's okay. Either one was okay with me. That's up to her. That's up to her.
Vice President Harris, your thoughts on this?
Honestly, I think it's a tragedy that we have someone who wants to be president who has consistently, over the course of his career, attempted to use race to divide the American people. I do believe that the vast majority of us know that we have so much more in common than what separates us, and we don't want this kind of approach that is just constantly trying to divide us, and especially by race. And let's remember how Donald Trump started. He was land, he owned buildings, and he was investigated because he refused to rent property to black families.
What was interesting about her response to it, because I thought that Donald Trump should have had a better answer prepared. I mean, he almost denying the words that he spoke himself. Kamala Harris didn't make it about herself. She made it about everything else, other people, and the other issues of race where Donald Trump has sought to divide Americans. And I thought that was really smart on her point, not to be in high dudgeon and say, how dare he say that about me? It was about how dare he do that to America and Americans.
What she did was reminded people that those comments about her race weren't a one-off, that he had gone into Charlottesville talking about good people on both sides when he was addressing neo-Nazi rallies, and that he'd talked about the Proud Boys, stand back and stand by. And she kind of made it a theme and reminded people that this was what they would be going back to, this constant sort of background noise of racism and racial divide. And it was so much smarter, I think, than turning it into identity politics. She doesn't have to explain who she is. She doesn't have to explain the colour of her skin or her background or her identity or her mixed parentage. That would have, in a way, led her down the wrong alley and would have been quite self-indulgent. And I think what she managed to do each time was kind of rise above the question at stake and sort of go for something that talked to people. And actually, physically, she did that. I mean, given that he's had much more experience, it was curious that he looked directly at the moderators nearly all the time, and she went down the barrel of the camera. In other words, she was speaking to people watching. And I think that's even more important when you don't have an audience. You know, there was that moment when they both came in at the very beginning. It was absolutely silent. It felt like a courtroom, not like a TV studio. And so she sort of played on that, didn't she? She's like, I'm down the barrel and I'm going to talk to you at home. And he was just addressing the moderators each time.
I thought it fascinating when they both came on stage, and this had echoes for me of 2016 when Donald Trump loomed over Hillary Clinton and walked sort of over to where she was addressing the audience, and sort of, it was rather intimidating. Kamala Harris walks on stage and walks over to Donald Trump's podium, puts out her right hand and says, "Hello, I'm Kamala Harris." They had never met before. And so she introduced herself to him, making it clear that she was in charge of this situation. I just thought it was a quiet assertion that was very effective from the get-go. Like, she moved into Trump's territory, she moved to Trump's podium, and she was the one who took the lead on it all. And I thought that was smart as well.
Yeah, it is also an extraordinary thing that she's been a senator. She was the Democratic senator for California when he was president, and he's never met her. You know, how does that work? How could you not actually have met your 100 senators during the sort of 4 years of a presidency? In a way, that is an extraordinary thing. But you're right, that was just sort of taken on, dealt with, and then it was done. I wonder if we should speak a little bit about the section where Trump is asked, finally, if he's conceded that he's lost the last election, because he gave an interview a week or so ago when he said, well, yes, we lost by a whisker. And everyone went, oh, fine. Okay, great. So the election denial is now over. He's kind of recognized it. What was he doing for the last 4 years? But there we go. We're on. And today he said, didn't you realize it was sarcasm?
Mr. President, for 3.5 years after you lost the 2020 election, you repeatedly falsely claimed that you won, many times saying you won in a landslide. In the past couple of weeks leading up to this debate, you have said, quote, you lost by a whisker, that you, quote, didn't quite make it, that you came up a little bit short.
I said that?
Are you now acknowledging that you lost in 2020?
No, I don't acknowledge that at all.
But
I
you
said
did
that
say
sarcastically.
that.
You know that. It was said, oh, we lost by a whisker. That was said sarcastically.
It immediately took my mind back to when Donald Trump gave the briefing in the White House, and I was there, and he talked about people drinking bleach as a way of treating COVID. And the next day, in the clear-up operation after that calamity, it was said by the White House staff he was just being sarcastic, he wasn't being serious. Of course he wasn't being sarcastic, he was being serious. But the other thing about Donald Trump answering that question in the way that he did, it helps Kamala Harris prosecute her argument that she is about the future of America and the future of what people want, and Donald Trump is relitigating the grievances of the past and his still belief that he did not lose the 2020 election.
Yeah, and if you want to get a sense now of what those around him are thinking and feeling, they're starting to blame the moderators. And that is usually a sign In our experience, it's usually a sign. When the moderators are getting blamed, Megyn Kelly has said they're disgraceful failure. This is one of the most biased, unfair debates I've ever seen. Shame on you, ABC. That is a concession of sorts that they think he fucked up here. And that is what they're going for. And actually, the moderators, I think, were unfair in that they gave Trump, I was reading, an extra 9 or 10 minutes actually of airtime because he came back in even after the mics were cut. But when he came in and he kind of doubled down on some of the stuff and some of the actual lies he was repeating about Harris at that point, I guess that did not do him any favors. And so it's interesting that, we know how spin rooms work now. And when you think there's a chance that you can go into the spin room and say, fantastic, what a great performance, he really socked it to her, then you're trying to do your best to kind of, put the face of this was victory. When you start blaming the moderators and saying it's disgraceful and saying shame on you, you've kind of conceded that your candidate has bombed.
I think there's one other area we need to talk about, which I think, for a global audience will be particularly interesting and kind of on international affairs. Because on Ukraine, Donald Trump was asked a very simple question that he was then pressed on. Do you want Ukraine to win? And he couldn't answer.
And I want to ask you a very simple question tonight. Do you want Ukraine to win this war?
I want the war to stop. I want to save lives that are being people being killed by the millions. It's the millions. It's so much worse than the numbers that you're getting, which are fake numbers.
He was asked repeatedly, do you want Ukraine to win this war and how would you stop it? And he just uses this phrase, I want to get the war settled. Settled is his phrase. Now, again, I think to a European ear, we kind of think that this is black and white. We kind of think that we just want to see Ukraine get on top of this because if they don't, we know what's coming next. But actually, for an American audience, maybe that is what they want to hear. Maybe the Trump fans just want to know no more money's going over there. I think his stuff on NATO plays very well. He's always sold NATO as this body that the US has underwritten and the penny pinching Europeans haven't paid into properly. So maybe that form of words will get him over the line there. But then she turns it around and she articulates something, I think, that I've never heard a Democrat do as well before. And she says, do you realize that world leaders are laughing at you? That dictators and autocrats want you back in power because they know they can manipulate you with their favors.
Putin would be sitting in Kyiv with his eyes on the rest of Europe, starting with Poland. And why don't you tell the 800,000 Polish Americans right here in Pennsylvania how quickly you would give up for the sake of favor and what you think is a friendship with what is known to be a dictator who would eat you for lunch.
We'll be back in a second.
The Newsagents USA. The Newsagents USA with Emily Maitlis and John Sopel.
So we talked about cats and dogs perishing at the start of this episode. There is only one cat that matters this morning, and it's the one being carried on her shoulder by Taylor Swift as she looks back on that Instagram post and says, this is the reason I am voting for Kamala Harris. And you just have to wonder how many people will have registered to vote for her and vote in this election as a result of that intervention.
Yeah, and we should say that this debate is the first time they've met, and it will almost certainly be the last time they debate. And get your head around this. People in certain states of America will be able to start voting by post in less than 2 weeks' time. So it is already upon us. The election is November the 5th, but there will be 45 days of postal voting before that date. And so in a way, this is going to be one of the clinchers, one of the deciders for people who are making their minds up already about which way to go. And Kamala Harris, I think, will be pretty pleased with that performance. Not just that she led him down certain byways, but that apart from those initial nerves, she kind of held her game. She even managed to insert in the sort of 90th minute, in the very last second, that she was a gun owner. You know, who saw that coming? Tim Walsh and I, we both have guns. We're gun owners. We're not going to take your guns away. And I think part of her job tonight was to reassure Americans that, you know, she might be labelled a Marxist. She's not a Marxist. She might be labelled somebody who's going to defund the police. She's not going to defund the police. She's not going to end fracking. She's not going to take your guns away. And for now, that's the message that her side will be really happy that she had a chance to get across.
I will just add one other postscript. And you spoke a moment ago about the rules of the spin room, where your surrogates fan out and say, my guy, my woman, whatever, was excellent. Donald Trump has gone into the spin room himself. Clearly, he feels that there is an operation that needs to happen after that debate, and so he is trying to spin it himself. And from the images I've seen so far, it's not going that well. We'll be back later on today with the main edition of the News Agents. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye for now. We've just got to decide if we're going to bed or not.
Do you fancy meeting for an early greasy spoon breakfast, Maitlis?
I rather do, actually. Yes.
Okay. I'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye.
The News Agents USA